right, so in the last video, what we did was we created a new filter within our NIM installation here to actually pull out the list of users that need to be created. We also supplemented that information with a new name generator, our NG employees name generator here. And what that's going to do is take our data from our filter and allow us to kind of create permutations of that to find, say, the next available same account name in the case of Active Directory, or maybe an email address for another system. In this video, what we'll do is look at the password generation, and then we'll actually finally move to the output section of NIM here and talk about mappings, and then also jobs and schedulers. So at the end of this video, we will have accounts actually running in an automated sense in creating those accounts into Active Directory. We'll get through the actual scheduling piece as well as actually mapping data up into Active Directory. All right, so let's start off with our password generator. So just like our name gen, we can actually have multiple of these. So if we needed to have different password schemes depending on, say, a user type or something about the methodology of creating the accounts needs to differ in certain situations, we can have multiple password generators. We'll go ahead and click add here. And again, the names are not important, or the name format is not important here, but I'm going to use PG as a password generator prefix and then just call this employee. All right, similar to what we saw with the name generator, we have a list of items that we are going to have a NIM generate, and we can define those in terms of the parts that we want to use to construct that value. Now, unlike the name generator, this is far less complex. We don't need to worry about collisions. We don't really need to worry about a lot of kind of auxiliary actions that need to occur here. In the case of our demo, what we're going to do is actually just have NIM generate a random value. And this is actually the default that NIM will create when we make our password generator. So we don't have to do anything special here. In yours, as you bring this up, you'll notice that part 1 is already marked as random. And if we select that part, we get a list of configuration options that we can have for this. So depending on your requirements, if we need a longer password or a shorter password, or, you know, in my case, I'm going to have this exclude similar characters. So we don't have things like zeros and O's that we're not entirely sure, or it's a little bit harder to determine what is going on there. So as I checked that, you may have noticed that the example value actually updated here. So we are getting some feedback to be able to see what is this going to look like. So if we needed to verify that, you know, this is going to line up pretty close to what our password format is, we at least have that visibility here. Now, like the name gen, we could actually tell the password generator to run off of data from a filter. And then in that case, we could actually pull data from this filter, say the first name, the last name, maybe their ID number, something along those lines. We could pull those parts in instead of using random and actually construct a value very much the same way that we constructed the same account name or the CN in the name generator example. But again, for the purpose of this demo, we'll just stick with a random value, and we're going to have this be 8 characters. Go ahead and hit save here. And at this point, what we have is that we have a filter giving us our data. So we know who needs to be created. We know data about them. We also have our name generator that's taking that information and allowing us to construct new values and also verify that a value may be unique in a particular context. And now we have a password generator that we can say, hey, for each one of these users, when we go to create them, generate a random password based off of our configuration that we've laid out here. So with all of those different data points, we're now ready to actually tell NIM how to go about mapping or managing to create an account. So we'll go into the mappings here, and just like we've seen with all the other pages, we'll go ahead and create a new mapping. Now we have a couple of options here. Now this will depend on the number of systems that we have built into the NIM integration, right? So if you have added additional systems or you have different systems than me, this may look a little bit different, but the general idea is going to stay the same. In our case, we're going to be targeting Active Directory, so I'll choose our AD system. And then for our target, this is asking for what kind of object or what table we want to manipulate with this mapping. So in our case, we're wanting to manipulate the user objects. And then function-wise, this is going to tell us what kinds of changes or alterations that we want to make. So obviously, in our case, we've been focused at user create. So I'll choose that option. And we will look at the user update here in the next video. So we'll get a sense for how some of the other functions work as well. And NIM auto creates sort of a name here. I'm going to throw employees onto the beginning of this, again, just to kind of differentiate between if we had other user types. We'll go ahead and hit save, and this will bring us into our mapping. All right, so there are three main areas of the mapping that we're going to care about. We'll start with the top here. So what we're seeing is some drop downs to handle selecting what filter we want to pull in. So what data do we want to pull in to this particular mapping? And you'll see on the left-hand side that this is going to start populating columns for us as well to pick from. We also are going to want a name generator, right? So we're able to select that name gen that we have. And again, you'll see that this has now populated those additional 3 columns, and then our password gen as well. So we'll select that, and we see our password gen here added to the list. So we've kind of combined these 3 sets of data that we've created in the processing layer. We've kind of combined them together into one big data set, and now what we can do is take all of these different columns and we can bind them to the attributes in our target system, so Active Directory in this case. One of the things I like to do whenever I'm setting up a mapping is actually use the arrow keys here above the items list. And what this does is allows us to actually cycle through the user data for each of our records in our filter. And this just gives us a nice value to work with. So at least I know kind of what the data is going to look like as I'm pulling it over into the attribute mapping. So from here, what we want to do is take these items on the left-hand side, and we're actually going to just drag and drop them over into the attribute mapping. So we'll actually just kind of start, I'll just start from the top here of the attribute maps, and we'll grab the appropriate item here. And you'll see this little, what is this, a 3x4 little grid of dots. What we can do is actually just grab these and pull them over and drop them into the value specification column here for each of the attributes. So for account password, this is going to be our password generator. So I'll pull this guy over, and you'll see that we get a nice preview over here as well of that text. So we'll do the same thing for the CN. For description, what I was thinking is we'll use the department value for this. Now, obviously, description could be anything we wanted, but we'll go ahead and populate with that with the department here. And then for the employee ID, so this is an important one because while it's not bolded, meaning that it's not a required value that we actually set as part of our mapping, if you remember back in I believe it was the first video, when we were setting up the relations between our systems, we used that employee ID as kind of that anchor attribute between our 2 systems. So we want to make sure that this is populated. So we'll grab our user ID and we'll throw that over here into the employee ID attribute. Enabled is just a flag inside of Active Directory, and obviously whenever we're creating an account, we probably want them created in a particular way. So I'm just going to type in true into this value instead of pulling it from the filter. So you'll notice that the source here is actually different. This is a constant value versus a filter value. We'll see that also here for the path here in just one moment. So I'm going to continue through with the rest of these attributes and just map them up to the appropriate ones. All right, so I have all of my attributes mapped up here. You'll notice that we have a couple of blanks still. I'm not going to worry about telephone number, and then obviously depending on the attributes that you may have selected to actually be pulled into Active Directory, or from Active Directory, sorry, into NIM, this list may also adjust, right? So obviously there's potentially hundreds of attributes in Active Directory that we could be managing, so this list could be significantly longer. Now the blank that I do want to talk about is path. And this is actually a required attribute as well, right? So we need to be able to tell NIM where in Active Directory do we want to create this account. Now I've already set up a NIM OU here inside of our demo domain, and I'm just going to add users directly into the base level of this OU. So I'm going to come over to the path, and just like we did with the enabled flag here, we're just going to do a constant value, and I'm going to type in the domain name, or rather the OU name for this particular path. So at this point, we can go ahead and hit save, and this is our user create mapping. We get a nice little preview over here on the right showing what this particular user account will look like in terms of what attributes will be rendered for them. But this is just one user at a time. If we actually go up to our Run tab here, what's going to happen is NIM will render this information out for all 7 of those users that we need to create. So we're actually able to see along the top here, each of these is the different attributes inside of Active Directory, and we're able to see what that data will be generated as. So obviously we have some constant values, things like the path, everybody's going to go there. But we can see that the random passwords being generated for each of the users. We can see those CNs and usernames being generated as well. And so again, just depending on the attributes that you have in your system, this could be a little bit longer of a grid. It just depends on what attributes we are populating. All right. So we have our mapping now set up. This is going to tell NIM how do we go about creating an account. What I like to do is always I like to test a particular user before we actually go and get NIM running on a schedule. I'm going to use Ashley Johnson here as our example. So if I select this record and I click on this run selected item here, what's going to happen is down below we'll get a nice log that shows the output from Active Directory. So this is actually NIM taking this record and sending it to Active Directory to be created. If I click on our log here, we can actually see all of these details and ensure, yep, the user account was created exactly where I was expecting it to be. And here's all the values for those attributes. So we didn't have any errors. That's great. That means that NIM is working, is able to communicate with Active Directory, and is able to create the account without any problems. If there were some errors here, I might go and start looking at, are there collision issues? Are there other object issues? Do I have a typo in my path, for example? Or maybe even permissions issues on the NIM service as well. But since we didn't have any errors, we are good to go. So the next step here is we're going to go look at jobs, right? So our mappings are particular actions that we want to run. And now what we need a way to do is take that list of actions and group them together into a particular sequence that we want to be able to schedule. And that's what jobs are meant to do. So we'll go ahead and create a new job here. And again, I'm just going to use a particular naming sequence. This doesn't really matter. I'm going to call mine employee AD, click add, and this takes us into the configuration window. So from the configuration window, what we're going to do is actually tell NIM what sequence of actions, right, or mappings do we want to run in this particular instance. Now, in our case, we only have one mapping so far. We'll add another one here in the next video. So I'm going to go ahead and click add. It's going to add a record into this grid. And what we can do is for the type and the name, we can drop these down. And for the mappings, these are all going to be CRUD type actions, meaning that we're going to either do some sort of create or update or disable or delete for these particular records. And then for the name, what we want to do is select the particular event or action that we want here. So again, we only have the one. So I'm going to select our employee user create mapping. There are 2 other items here that we should look at, and that is the threshold and the enabled flag. So I could actually set this up and disable certain actions if I needed to. And then the threshold is actually what's going to tell NIM, hey, if there's ever more than X number, in this case 10 users that need to be created, maybe that's outside of our expectation and we want NIM to actually halt. So if all of a sudden NIM was running and it wanted to create 150 records, that's unexpected, right? That's outside of the bounds of what we'd consider normal. So I want to make sure this threshold is set to a reasonable value. I'm going to leave this as 10 because we're well under that. And what we can do is now is just hit save, and we can go over to the execution tab. Now, from the execution tab, we have a run button here, but it's actually grayed out. And that's because we need to actually run an evaluation to see what NIM would do. So I'm going to click that button and you'll see that we have 7 records that need to be created. Now that's not quite right. We actually created a user already, so we don't need to have 7 anymore. So if I click on this record or this list here again, we'll see that Ashley Johnson is still listed here. And this is just because of a caching issue, right? Where NIM doesn't know that that AD account exists quite yet. So from here, let's actually go back to our systems. And what we'll do is just quickly refresh our AD system here. All right, now that AD has been refreshed, we know that that account has been created. Let's go back to our job and we'll click on the edit button here on the actions for that job. And now let's run that evaluation one more time. So here, and I'll expand this out so we can actually read it. What this job is saying is that the employee AD user create action now has 6 records that it wants to create. So we'll click on that and you'll see that Ashley Johnson is no longer in this list. All right, so this is working as expected, right? So what just happened here was we've created an account inside of Active Directory, and I can actually pull up our AD domain, refresh this really quick, and there's our Ashley Johnson account. So we've created the account. We've told NIM how to actually run this sequence of events, in that we only have one item to actually run. So there isn't, a real order issue that we need to deal with there. But we've told NIM how to do that. And then we've also verified that by refreshing the data inside of NIM, that it's able to see accounts that were created and know that, hey, I don't need to create Ashley Johnson anymore. That account already exists. And that just goes back to that first video where we talked about those inter-system relations, and it shows how that is connecting now between that existing account and the data that we have inside of NIM or coming from our employees CSV. All right, so the last thing that we want to cover here in this video is how to actually go about scheduling this to run. So I could run this directly from the jobs menu, but obviously the point of automation is that this be an automated process. So if I was testing and I wanted to, I could run this and have all 6 of these users get created. But what I want to do is go down to our scheduler here. And just like we saw with the jobs, we need to create a new scheduler item. So I'll add a new one here. And for the type, what we're looking for is sync. So obviously there's a couple of different options here. A lot of this is covered inside of the documentation site for NIM as well. So if you are curious about doing things like exports or different retention management, things like that, that's a great resource. So in our case, we're going to do sync, and I'm just going to call this employees. Oops. Hit save. And we're taken to a screen with a couple of options here. The main things that we are going to care about is the collect and the execute. So I'm going to turn off the evaluation option here. This would be used if we wanted to send out an email notification prior to actually executing the job. So if I wanted to notify someone and say, hey, these are the 7 people or 6 people, I guess, in this case, that need to be created, I could have an email automatically go out for that. So up at the top for collect, what we need to do is tell NIM what systems should it refresh every time this runs. So I'm going to add a new system, and I'm going to select Active Directory first. I'm going to clear out this maximum age just so we don't have any issues there. And this basically tells NIM run and collect the system every time. I don't care about if you just ran 30 seconds ago. I want you to refresh this data. I'm also going to choose the stop on error, just so that if we do have a problem reading AD or the CSV, that NIM won't continue to try and process. So we'll add another one as well, because we want to be able to refresh the employee data as well. And again, I'm going to choose the stop on error. Now I'm blinking these out. You could very easily throw a 0 in here as well. It doesn't really matter. So now that we have our systems to be collected, we can tell NIM what jobs need to be executed as part of this. So we can actually have multiple jobs. Let's say I have an employee AD and then maybe like an employee Google set of jobs that I need to actually run. I could have both of those listed here. So again, I'm going to click add, select the job that we have, and I'm going to leave off the stop on error. And this is just for ease of troubleshooting later on. But you could turn this off, or turn this on. So if we knew that, hey, if there was a problem, I want this to go ahead and stop execution on NIM, I could easily turn that on. We'll go ahead and hit save for now, and we'll move over to the scheduler tab. So what's happening here is that we can enable the scheduling or turn this on and off, but we can also define the frequency that we want this to run. So right now, this is going to run every day at 2:15 in the morning. Maybe I need this to run a little bit more frequently. So maybe I wanted this to run every hour at 15 minutes after the hour, right? So you can play around with the scheduling to get it exactly where you want. I'm going to leave this at once a day at 2:15. And then I'm also going to just uncheck, say, the weekends, right? Because we probably don't need it to run then. So I'm going to check the scheduling enabled, and I can even click calculate instances here and see an example of exactly what the upcoming frequency is going to be, just to make sure that, whatever I'm setting here in these dropdowns actually mimics what I'm trying to get. So we'll hit save here one more time, and we'll go back to the scheduler overview, and there's our scheduler item. This will run obviously automatically. We can see the next run is scheduled at 2:15 tomorrow. But we also have this play button where we can run this right now. So what I'm going to do is actually run this guy, and we'll see down below the log of refreshing the data. So you'll see that it's talking about collecting the user or the employee's user file as well as Active Directory. And then we see the execution of our 6 accounts. And in our case, we had a user that actually failed to get created. So we have an error listed here inside of our scheduler. Inside of our log here for the scheduler. Now, if I click on this, we'll get some errors back from ADSI or from Active Directory telling us that there was some particular problem with this account. Now, very likely that this is actually a password problem. So since we have a randomly generated password, there may have been a sequence of characters that was not legal. So I'm just going to go back, and we're going to run this guy one more time and see if that user goes through. All right, so that actually wasn't a password issue. This was something that is going to be very specific to Active Directory, and that is the same account name is actually has to be limited to less than or equal to 20 characters. So this is actually a name generation issue, right? So in this case, Christopher Garcia with their ID number is way too long for the particular account. So in order to fix that name generation issue, let's go back into our name generator. And what we'll do is we'll add some additional requirements or some additional conversions on our same account name to make sure that we don't hit this limit again. Now, there's a couple different ways that we could approach this, and obviously this is going to depend on your particular environment. But let's start with maybe just limiting the first name and the last name so that we have 7 characters. That's enough for our 6-digit ID plus that period in between the names. So we'll limit it down to 6 characters for both the first name and the last name. So what I'm going to do is select our first name here, and I'm going to find the shorten to the first n characters, and I'm going to provide 6 as our parameter here, and then I'm going to do the same thing for last name. So we'll select on part 2, and then we'll do shorten to the first n characters, and then 6 again, and there we go. So we get a slightly different value than we saw before, and we could obviously replicate this change onto other values. So I might do that for the user principal name here as well, just to kind of keep the 2 usernames convenient or similar to the 2 or to the same value. So I'll select first name here, again shorten to first n characters. We'll do 6, and then again on the same or the last name. There we go. So we have now a username and a user principal name that will be under that 20 character limit. And again, there's a couple of different ways that we could handle this. There's actually other shorten to total length values or conversion options that we have available to us. But in this particular case, this one is easy enough to do just by shortening the first and last name. So we'll go ahead and hit save here. We'll go back to our job now, we'll go back to our scheduler overview, and let's run this one more time. And there we go. We have our one user that was left to be created, being created as expected here. All right, so this is a bit of a longer video, but the next one we'll do is we'll look at expanding this to not only create the accounts that are in our CSV, and again, we can jump back to AD really quick and refresh this, and there's all of our users. So we'll look at not only creating accounts, but also what happens if somebody were to change to a different department or have a name change or something along those lines, right? What if the data actually changes? How do we make sure that those accounts get updated? So in the next one, we'll look at adding a new filter, a new mapping, and then we'll add on to our job and our scheduler at the same time so that we have accounts being created and updated automatically on our scheduler.